The elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor of Sterling Dynamics Corporation, revealing two worlds that couldn't be more different. Executive Vice President Marcus Wellington stepped out in his $3,000 Italian suit, barely glancing at the janitor mopping the marble floors nearby. The custodian wore a faded blue uniform with Eddie embroidered on the chest pocket, his head down as he worked methodically around the expensive leather furniture. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Marcus didn't know was that this janitor owned the very building he strutted through every morning. The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Chicago as 22-year-old Sarah Chen hurried through the revolving doors of Sterling Dynamics. Her second-hand blazer was slightly too big, and her worn laptop bag bounced against her hip as she navigated through the bustling lobby. 3 months into her unpaid internship, she still felt like an outsider in this world of marble columns and crystal chandeliers. Sarah had grown up in a cramped apartment above her family's laundromat, where the sound of washing machines was the soundtrack to her childhood. Her parents, immigrants from Taiwan, had worked 16-hour days to send her to Northwestern University. Now, as a recent graduate with student loans that made her stomach churn, this internship at one of Chicago's most prestigious corporations was her shot at breaking into the finance world. The elevator was packed with executives discussing weekend golf games and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Sarah pressed herself against the back wall, clutching her coffee, the cheapest option from the corner bodega, not the expensive Italian espresso machine in the company break room that cost more than her weekly grocery budget. "Did you see the new quarterly projections?" Senior Director Rebecca Thornton was saying to her colleague. "The Denver acquisition is going to make us millions." "Too bad some people around here don't understand real business strategy." Her eyes briefly met Sarah's in the elevator's reflection, and Rebecca's expression showed exactly what she thought about interns who shopped at thrift stores. The elevator stopped at the 15th floor, and Sarah stepped out into the bustling marketing department. Sterling Dynamics occupied floors 12 through 35 of the gleaming skyscraper, with each level representing a different rung on the corporate ladder. The higher you went, the better the view, and the more expensive the suits. "Chen, you're 2 minutes late," barked James Morrison, the department supervisor who seemed to take personal pleasure in making Sarah's life difficult. His red face was already flushed at 8:32 a.m., probably from his morning workout at the executive gym that Sarah could never afford to join. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison. The subway was delayed, and I don't want excuses, I want results. The Hartwell presentation needs to be completely reformatted. Everything. Fonts, colors, layouts. Make it look professional for once, and I need it done by lunch." Sarah's heart sank. The Hartwell presentation was 47 slides of complex financial data that had taken her 3 days to compile. Reformatting it would mean working through lunch again, surviving on vending machine crackers while her stomach growled. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. I'll get right on it." As she hurried to her desk, a cramped corner workspace next to the humming copy machine, Sarah noticed the janitor from the elevator cleaning the windows near the conference room. His movements were precise, professional, almost methodical in a way that reminded her of her father's careful attention to detail at the laundromat. Eddie seemed different from the other custodial staff. While they chatted loudly and took frequent breaks, he worked quietly, efficiently, with an intensity that suggested he actually cared about doing the job well. There was something about his posture, the way he carried himself, that didn't quite match the humble uniform. "Sarah, darling." The sing-song voice belonged to Victoria Ashford, one of the senior analysts who treated the office like her personal kingdom. "I need you to run down to the basement and get more printer paper. The good stuff, not that cheap nonsense they usually order. And while you're at it, grab me a latte from that little cafe on Michigan Avenue. Make sure they use oat milk. My stomach simply cannot handle regular dairy." Victoria placed a crumpled $5 bill on Sarah's desk with a theatrical sigh. "That should cover it, sweetie. Keep the change." Sarah stared at the money. A latte from that cafe cost $12, and Michigan Avenue was a 20-minute walk each way. She'd have to pay the difference out of her own pocket and lose nearly an hour of work time, putting her even further behind on the presentation. "Actually, Miss Ashford, I'm on a tight deadline with the Hartwell." "Oh, honey," Victoria's voice dripped with condescension. "This is how the real world works. Interns fetch coffee. Employees with actual jobs make important decisions. Which one are you again?" The nearby cubicles had gone quiet. Sarah felt the weight of a dozen stares, some sympathetic, others amused. She reached for the $5 bill, her face burning with humiliation. "Actually, I'll get the coffee." Everyone turned to see Eddie standing near the water cooler, having finished cleaning the windows. His voice was calm, confident, not what you'd expect from someone whose job description included emptying trash cans. Victoria blinked in surprise. "Excuse me?" "I said I'll get the coffee. I was heading out anyway, and Michigan Avenue was on my route." Eddie's eyes met Sarah's briefly, and she caught something unexpected there. Intelligence, kindness, and a hint of something else she couldn't quite identify. "That's," Victoria stammered, clearly thrown off her script. "That's not how this works. Janitors don't fetch coffee for executives, interns do." "Why?" Eddie asked simply. "Because of what's written on our name tags?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers tapped against her designer handbag as she tried to formulate a response that didn't sound completely elitist. James Morrison appeared at Victoria's shoulder, his face even redder than before. "Is there a problem here, Chen? Why aren't you working on that presentation?" "Your intern was about to waste an hour running errands when she has actual work to do," Eddie said, his tone respectful but firm, seemed inefficient. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "I'm sorry, who are you to comment on efficiency in my department?" "Just someone who notices things." Eddie's smile was polite. But there was steel underneath it. Like how much money this company loses when talented people spend their time on tasks that have nothing to do with their actual jobs. "Talented?" Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the office chatter. "She's an unpaid intern. She's here to learn how business really works, which includes understanding that there's a hierarchy. Some people give orders, and other people follow them. It's been working for centuries." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to disappear into the floor, to become invisible like she had so many times growing up when classmates made jokes about her hand-me-down clothes or her parents' accents. But Eddie stepped closer, positioning himself slightly between Sarah and the two executives. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the hierarchy you're talking about isn't actually about talent or capability. Maybe it's about something else entirely." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other employees had stopped pretending to work, openly watching the confrontation unfold. Sarah had never seen anyone, especially someone in a service position, challenge the executive so directly. Morrison's face was now approaching purple. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but maintenance staff don't get to lecture management about business practices. You're way out of line." "Am I?" Eddie asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're wasting valuable company resources. This intern, Sarah, just graduated from Northwestern with honors. She's been working 60-hour weeks on that Hartwell presentation, which, by the way, is the most thorough market analysis I've seen in years. And instead of letting her finish work that could potentially save this company millions, you want her to spend an hour walking to Michigan Avenue because someone can't be bothered to order their own coffee." Sarah stared at Eddie in shock. How did he know she'd graduated with honors? How did he know about the long hours she'd been putting in? And how had he seen her work on the Hartwell presentation? Victoria's laugh became even sharper. "Oh, this is rich. The janitor thinks he's a business consultant now. Tell me, what exactly qualifies you to analyze market research?" Eddie's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A hint of amusement, as if Victoria had just told a joke she didn't realize was funny. "Experience," he said simply. Morrison stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I think you need to remember your place here. You're paid to clean floors and empty trash cans, not to share your opinions about how this company should be run. And if you can't remember that, maybe we need to find someone who can." The threat was clear. Sarah watched Eddie's face, expecting him to back down, to apologize, to remember that he needed this job, just like she needed her internship. Instead, he smiled, a calm, almost serene expression that seemed completely out of place in the tense moment. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Morrison. I should remember my place." Eddie's voice was soft, almost conversational. "The question is, do you remember yours?" Before anyone could respond to that cryptic statement, Eddie turned to Sarah. "The presentation you're working on, the Hartwell analysis. You mentioned that their third-quarter projections seem inflated. Have you considered looking at their subsidiary acquisitions over the past 18 months? I think you'll find some interesting patterns there. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah's mouth fell open. She had been puzzling over those exact projections for days, sensing something was off but unable to pinpoint what. The subsidiary angle was brilliant, and not something that would occur to most people without deep experience in corporate finance. "How did you?" she began. "Just a suggestion," Eddie said with a gentle smile, "from someone who empties trash cans." With that, he picked up his cleaning cart and walked away, leaving behind a silence so complete that the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Victoria and Morrison exchanged glances, both clearly unsettled by the encounter but unable to articulate exactly why. There had been something in Eddie's demeanor, in the way he'd spoken about the company, that suggested he knew far more than any janitor should. Sarah sat down at her desk, her mind racing. She pulled up the Hartwell files and began researching their subsidiary acquisitions following Eddie's suggestion. Within 10 minutes, she'd uncovered a pattern of inflated asset values that could save Sterling Dynamics from a potentially disastrous investment. As she worked, she found herself glancing toward the hallway where Eddie had disappeared, wondering who he really was and why someone with his obvious intelligence and business acumen was mopping floors in a corporate office building. She had no idea that 32 floors above her, in the executive suite she'd never seen, there was an office with Edward Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, engraved on a platinum nameplate on the door. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. News of the confrontation between Eddie and the executives had spread through the 15th floor like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. By lunch, some versions had Eddie delivering a 10-minute speech about corporate ethics, while others claimed he'd threatened to sue for workplace discrimination. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the image of Eddie standing up to Morrison and Victoria with such calm confidence. She'd followed his suggestion about the Hartwell subsidiary acquisitions and uncovered irregularities that could save Sterling Dynamics millions. The analysis was sophisticated, the kind of insight that came from years of high-level corporate experience. Who was this janitor? Around noon, Sarah's stomach began its familiar rumbling symphony. She'd brought a peanut butter sandwich from home, carefully wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, because she couldn't afford sandwich bags. As she unwrapped her modest lunch at her desk, she noticed Victoria and her circle of senior analysts gathering around the break room's granite island, their designer salads and imported sparkling water creating a stark contrast to Sarah's humble meal. "I'm telling you, something's not right about that maintenance guy," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying across the open office space. "Did you see the way he talked? No janitor speaks like that." Rebecca Thornton, the senior director from the elevator, leaned in conspiratorially. "Maybe he's a corporate spy. Companies do that sometimes. Send in undercover people to root out inefficiencies." "Or union organizers," added Patricia Williams, the department's budget analyst. "Remember what happened at Goldman last year? They had someone infiltrate as a security guard, trying to get dirt on management practices." Sarah took a small bite of her sandwich, listening despite herself. She found herself oddly protective of Eddie, this stranger who had defended her when no one else would. "Well, whoever he is, he's about to learn that you don't mess with the wrong people around here," Victoria said, her voice taking on a vindictive edge. "I already called building security. Told them we had a maintenance worker behaving inappropriately, making staff uncomfortable." Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew exactly what that meant in corporate speak. Eddie would be fired before the day was over, probably escorted out by security guards while everyone watched. All because he'd stood up for her. Without thinking, Sarah stood up from her desk, her chair rolling backward into the copy machine with a loud bang. The executives turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from mild surprise to outright annoyance. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "I couldn't help overhearing. Eddie, the maintenance worker, he wasn't inappropriate. He was just being kind." Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose into sharp arcs. "Oh, sweetie, you don't understand office dynamics yet. When someone steps out of their lane like that, it creates problems for everyone." "But he was right," Sarah insisted, finding her voice growing stronger. "I was about to waste company time running errands when I had important work to finish. he was actually looking out for Sterling Dynamics' interests. Patricia laughed, a sound like ice clinking in an expensive glass. "Honey, you're an intern. You don't get to decide what's a waste of company time. That's what people with actual salaries and real responsibilities do." "Besides," Rebecca added, "there are protocols here. Hierarchies exist for a reason. When a janitor starts questioning management decisions, it undermines the entire structure." "What's next? The cafeteria staff giving investment advice?" Sarah felt her cheeks burning, but something had awakened inside her. The same fire that had driven her to graduate summa cum laude despite working 2 jobs, the same determination that had gotten her this internship despite having no connections or family money. "Maybe the structure is the problem," she said quietly. The break room fell silent. Even the hum of the expensive coffee machine seemed to pause. Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the weight of a threat. "Excuse me." I said, "Maybe the structure is the problem." Sarah's voice was steadier now, fueled by 3 months of accumulated frustrations. "Eddie knows more about business than half the people on this floor. I've been here 12 weeks, and I've seen managers make decisions that waste thousands of dollars while complaining about the cost of office supplies. I've watched executives spend 2-hour lunches discussing their country club memberships while interns work through meals on projects that actually matter." Rebecca stepped forward, her face flushed with indignation. "You have some nerves. Do you have any idea how privileged you are to even be here? There are thousands of students who would kill for your position. And there are thousands of qualified people who can't get these positions because they don't have the right connections or the right clothes or the right zip code," Sarah shot back. "Maybe if companies actually promoted based on merit instead of background, we'd all be better off." The tension in the room was electric. Other employees from nearby cubicles had stopped pretending to work, openly staring at the confrontation unfolding in the break room. Patricia's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Merit? Darling, this is the real world. Background matters because it's a filter for quality. The right schools, the right neighborhoods, the right families. These things matter because they indicate character, breeding, the kind of upbringing that produces reliable employees." "You mean the kind of upbringing that produces people who think their coffee is more important than someone else's work?" Sarah asked. Before anyone could respond, James Morrison appeared in the break room doorway, his face already showing signs of the stress that would define the rest of his afternoon. "Jen, what are you doing here? That presentation should have been finished an hour ago." Sarah glanced at the clock on the break room wall. It was 12:47 p.m., and she'd been so focused on following Eddie's research suggestion that she'd lost track of time. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison. She was just explaining to us why janitors should be giving business advice to executives," Victoria interrupted smoothly. Morrison's face went through several shades of red before settling on a deep crimson. "What?" "It's not like that," Sarah began, but Morrison held up a hand to silence her. "No, I want to hear this. Please, Chen, explain to me why you think you understand how this company should be run better than people who've been here for decades." Sarah felt trapped, surrounded by hostile faces and expensive suits. But then she thought about Eddie's calm confidence, the way he'd refused to be intimidated despite being outnumbered and outranked. "I don't think I know better than everyone," she said carefully, "but I think good ideas can come from anywhere, and dismissing someone because of their job title is short-sighted." "Good ideas," Morrison repeated slowly. "Like what, exactly?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was her moment. She could back down, apologize, and hope to survive the rest of her internship in peace. Or she could stand up for what she believed was right. "Like the fact that the Hartwell acquisition is a mistake," she said. "Their third-quarter projections are inflated by approximately 30%, based on asset values from subsidiary companies they acquired using leveraged buyouts. If Sterling Dynamics proceeds with the deal as planned, we'll be overpaying by at least $50 million. The break room fell completely silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. "And how, exactly, did you come to this conclusion?" "Research," Sarah said simply, "the kind of analysis that should be done before any major acquisition." "Research that you conducted instead of working on the presentation I assigned you?" Sarah realized she'd walked into a trap. Yes, but I found—" "You found an excuse to avoid doing the work you were actually assigned." Morrison's voice was getting louder. You decided that your amateur analysis was more important than the task given to you by your supervisor. But the analysis is correct, Sarah protested. The numbers don't lie. The numbers, Victoria said with a cold smile, were reviewed by teams of senior analysts, including myself. Are you suggesting we all missed something obvious that a college graduate spotted in one morning? Sarah felt the weight of their stares, the collective dismissal of her capabilities based on her age, her position, her second-hand clothes, and student loans. But she thought about her parents, working 16-hour days in the laundromat, never giving up despite the obstacles they faced. I'm suggesting that sometimes fresh eyes see things that familiar ones miss, she said quietly. And I'm suggesting that if you actually looked at my analysis instead of dismissing it because of who I am, you might be surprised. Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. Chen, let me make something very clear. You are here at the sufferance of this company. You are unpaid because you have no value yet. You are given menial tasks because you haven't earned the right to bigger ones. And if you continue to mistake your position here for something it's not, you'll find yourself back on the street faster than you can say student loans. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She thought about her parents' sacrifices, about the apartment above the laundromat where she'd studied by the light of discount fluorescent bulbs. She thought about the rejection letters from dozens of companies, the interviews where she was dismissed before she'd even finished speaking. But she also thought about Eddie standing calmly in the face of their arrogance, refusing to be intimidated. I understand my position perfectly, Mr. Morrison, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. The question is, do you understand yours? Before Morrison could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. Is there a problem here? Everyone turned to see Eddie standing in the break room doorway, his cleaning cart beside him. But something was different about his posture, the way he held himself. For a moment, Sarah could have sworn she was looking at someone else entirely, someone used to walking into rooms and having conversations stop. Morrison's face cycled through surprise, annoyance, and anger before settling on barely controlled rage. Perfect timing. Security is on their way up to escort you out of the building. Eddie's expression didn't change. Really? May I ask why? Because you forgot your place yesterday, and apparently your little stunt inspired our intern here to forget hers as well. Morrison gestured at Sarah with obvious disgust. She seems to think that janitors and college graduates are qualified to second-guess seasoned executives. Eddie's eyes met Sarah's briefly, and she saw something there. Approval, pride, and something else that looked almost like recognition. Maybe, Eddie said quietly, the problem isn't that she forgot her place. Maybe the problem is that you forgot yours. And with those words, the battle lines were drawn. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chen sat in her new office on the 28th floor, reviewing the final reports from the company-wide restructuring initiative. Through her floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Lake Michigan stretching endlessly toward the horizon, the afternoon sun casting golden reflections across the water. Her official title was Director of Corporate Ethics and Employee Development, a position that hadn't existed before Edward Sterling created it specifically for her. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now occupied an office just 7 floors below the executive suite where this whole adventure had begun. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her new assistant with the afternoon briefings. Instead, Eddie, she still thought of him as Eddie sometimes, stepped into her office, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the little cafe on Michigan Avenue. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her old monthly rent, but his smile was exactly the same as when he'd offered to get Victoria's coffee 3 weeks ago. "Thought you might need a caffeine break," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. "Oat milk, right?" Sarah laughed, remembering Victoria's demanding coffee order that had started everything. "You have a good memory, Mr. Sterling." "Edward," he corrected, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I think we're past formalities at this point." The transformation in Sterling Dynamics had been swift and comprehensive. Within 48 hours of Edward's revelation, Morrison and Victoria had been terminated for cause. Their severance packages were generous, but came with strict non-disclosure agreements and non-compete clauses that effectively ended their corporate careers in Chicago. Rebecca Thornton had been demoted to junior analyst and enrolled in mandatory sensitivity training, Patricia Williams had been transferred to the accounting department, where her attention to detail could be put to better use under closer supervision. The real surprise had been the other employees. Once the toxic leadership was removed, people began to flourish in ways that shocked everyone. The marketing department's productivity had increased by 40%. Employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Even the quarterly profits had shown unexpected growth. The Hartwell investigation wrapped up yesterday, Sarah said, sliding a thick folder across her desk. Your instincts were right. They were inflating subsidiary values to mask debt from their overseas operations. If we'd gone through with the acquisition, it would have cost us close to $200 million. Edward nodded, though he didn't look surprised. What's the damage to their company? SEC investigation, stock price in freefall, and their CEO resigned this morning. The whole thing's unraveling. Sarah paused, studying his face. You knew, didn't you? Before you ever suggested I look into the subsidiaries. I suspected, Edward admitted. Hartwell's been on our acquisition list for 2 years, but something about their numbers never felt right. I needed fresh eyes on it. Someone without preconceived notions about what the data should show. Is that why you were really down there? Playing janitor, I mean. You were investigating your own company? Edward leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Partly. But mostly, I was trying to understand why our employee satisfaction scores were so low despite competitive salaries and benefits. Exit interviews kept mentioning, quote, toxic management culture and lack of advancement opportunities. But the C-suite insisted everything was fine. Sarah shook her head in amazement. So you decided to see for yourself? Best decision I ever made, Edward said quietly. I learned more about this company in 3 months as a janitor than I had in 5 years as CEO. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of changes. Edward had implemented an anonymous feedback system that allowed employees to report problems directly to his office. He'd instituted a mentorship program pairing senior staff with junior employees. Most importantly, he'd created pathways for advancement based on merit rather than connections. The intern program had been completely overhauled. Unpaid positions were eliminated, replaced with paid apprenticeships that came with real responsibilities and career development opportunities. Sarah had been instrumental in designing the new program, drawing on her own experiences to ensure that talented people wouldn't be excluded due to financial circumstances. I got a call from Northwestern yesterday, Sarah said, changing the subject. They want me to give a guest lecture to their business ethics class about corporate culture transformation. That's fantastic. You should do it. I will. But I keep thinking about something you said that first day, about remembering our places. I've been wondering, did you know then that I'd end up here? Edward's smile was enigmatic. I knew you were special. The way you analyzed that Hartwell data. The questions you asked. The way you stood up to Morrison and Victoria despite knowing it could cost you everything. That takes a rare combination of intelligence, courage, and integrity. But you took a huge risk. What if I'd been wrong about the Hartwell deal? What if I'd been just another entitled intern who couldn't handle criticism? Then I would have learned something different, but equally valuable. Edward stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the bustling city below. You know what the real problem was? It wasn't Morrison or Victoria or any of the others individually. It was a system that allowed people like them to thrive while people like you struggled for basic recognition. Sarah joined him at the window. Far below, she could see people hurrying along the sidewalks, each carrying their own dreams and ambitions. Some would make it, others wouldn't, and the difference often had nothing to do with talent or effort. My parents still can't believe all this happened, Sarah said. My mom keeps asking when I'm going to get found out and fired. What do you tell her? That I'm not pretending to be anything I'm not. I'm just finally in a place where being myself is enough. Edward nodded approvingly. That's exactly the culture we're trying to build here. A place where potential isn't limited by zip codes or family connections. A gentle knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Sarah's assistant peeked in, looking slightly nervous to see the CEO in her office. Ms. Chen, there's a delegation from the Chicago Business Council here to see you. They're asking about the employee development program. Sarah looked at Edward, who nodded encouragingly. In the past 3 weeks, Sterling Dynamics had become a case study in corporate transformation. Other companies were sending representatives to learn about their methods, hoping to replicate their success. "Send them to conference room B," Sarah said. "I'll be right there." As her assistant left, Edward turned back to her with a proud smile. "Ready to change the world, Director Chen?" Sarah straightened her blazer, a new one, properly fitted, purchased with her first real paycheck. But she kept the old one in her closet as a reminder of where she'd come from. "You know," she said, 3 weeks ago I was eating peanut butter sandwiches at my desk, wondering if I'd ever amount to anything in the corporate world. And now? Now I realize I was asking the wrong question. It was never about whether I'd amount to anything. It was about whether the corporate world would amount to me." Edward laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I couldn't have said it better myself. As they walked toward the conference room together, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She thought about Eddie the janitor, quietly mopping floors while observing everything, and Edward the CEO, who'd had the wisdom to disguise himself as the person others ignored. She thought about Morrison and Victoria, so convinced of their own superiority that they'd never seen the revolution brewing right under their noses. They'd mistaken position for power, title for talent, and arrogance for authority. Most of all, she thought about the lesson that had emerged from this entire experience, that in a world obsessed with looking up the corporate ladder, the real insights often came from looking around, at the people beside you, below you, cleaning your floors and serving your coffee, each one carrying untapped potential that the right environment could unleash. The Chicago Business Council delegation was already seated when they entered the conference room. Sarah took her place at the head of the table. No longer the nervous intern hiding in the back of elevators, but a confident leader ready to share what she'd learned. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and strong, "let me tell you about a company that learned the difference between managing people and inspiring them. It's a story about what happens when you judge employees by their contributions rather than their backgrounds, and when you realize that the person mopping your floors might have more to teach you than the person in the corner office." As she began to speak, Sarah caught Edward's eye across the room. He nodded slightly, a gesture of approval and pride that said everything that needed to be said. Outside the conference room windows, the sun was setting over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. It was the end of one day and the beginning of countless others, each one an opportunity to build something better than what came before. And in a small apartment above a laundromat on the south side, Sarah's parents were watching the evening news, where their daughter was being interviewed about corporate ethics and employee empowerment, still hardly believing that the little girl who used to do homework by fluorescent light had somehow become someone the whole city wanted to hear from. The janitor and the intern had both found their places at last, and those places were exactly where they'd always belonged, at the top. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.